Good morning, everybody. Um, Hopefully, everybody enjoyed the morning refreshments. And I want to just take a little bit of time here and discuss with you how we are implementing quality assurance mechanisms for our computational and digital solutions, looking to reduce risk or minimize risk, and ultimately to save time. Just a little quick rundown here on RDG. We are a multidisciplinary firm. We have 8 different office locations, some of our primary locations being Denver, Des Moines, Iowa, New York City, Omaha, and St. Louis. Uh, we have approximately 176 employees right now, with the majority of our employees being employee owners. We are an employee owned company. We have more than 10 distinct services. Some of those include architecture, art, community regional planning, graphic design, landscape architecture, lighting, and we serve multiple markets, college and university, corporate, government, senior living, sports, just to name a few. And I think that I wanted to make sure I got that information out there because I think it plays a part in how we approach our process because we do serve a multitude of markets. We have a lot of different services and then even different disciplines as well, all in-house. Um, and so that it really is important to kind of understand that sometimes, a singular approach for just architecture or just landscape architecture or just lighting design doesn't really work when it comes to some of the tools and approaches that we take. And just a couple bits of information about myself. I am a partner, computational designer, and an architect at RDG Planning and Design. Uh, my primary background has been collegiate sports and recreation. I also have a variety of work in the college and university, civics, and corporate markets. Um, I'm a regular on the Dynamo forums. If any of you are familiar with that, I hang around quite a bit. Uh, have been a top solutions author for the Autodesk Revit API forums, so I try to be as active as I can be there as well. I know a variety of different programming languages, some better than others, C Sharp and Python, VB.NET being some of the main ones that I do, and then some other SQL stuff. I do a lot of work on a day-to-day basis with data collection and analysis and creating custom software applications for in-house use. A lot of add-ins for Revit or working with Grasshopper, Dynamo, Rhino stuff. Uh, this quote to me, I think, just sums up what I think about how we leverage or can leverage technology, and it boils down to there's a lot going on, and instead of having everything be something that's a bump or a mountain to climb in the middle of the road, if we look at it as a way to redirect pieces that are normally friction in our lives and turn them into momentum, I think that a lot of times folks try to, just throw their arms up and get just embattled with things that really don't matter, right? Pick your battles. So to me, I think about this often. I've shown it in several different presentations I've done. It's not life altering, but if you really look at taking things that normally would slow you down and redirecting the energy, it really truly can be turned into something that can actually benefit the process and the people that you work with. So red pill or blue pill? Do you really want to know the truth? Or do you want to continue thinking you live in a world where everything is perfect? Uh, it's a little bit of a Matrix reference there with number 4 coming out in short order. Some of my younger years spent a lot of time watching these, but what in my mind and what we try to kind of go at here is it's about communication and it's about messaging and these are just a few of the different things, from a Revit world that you may be presented with on a daily basis. Hopefully not, but potentially, where, just constantly things popping up and being in your face and telling you what's going on, sometimes more detailed than others. And this really is an important part of how to go about your quality assurance work, in my opinion. And we try to strive for really presenting our users with as much information as we can, trying to be as transparent as possible, really letting them understand what's going on, letting them behind the curtains, even if we can. And I think that that makes them feel more comfortable in the process. It lets them, have a little bit of sense of ownership in it, and that when something does go wrong, not only does it help, myself or anybody that may be trying to help them resolve an issue or fight through a solution, but it also, can help them help themselves a little bit and, give them that sense of pride that, hey, I figured this out. The message told me this. I understood what it meant, in layman's terms. Um, and that's really what we strive for. So I think the first step really in a quality assurance or quality control approach is going to be how you communicate, how you talk to your folks, the messaging, the instructions that we get out there. And we're going to walk through a couple more of those things as we get into this. But I think the other thing too to throw out here is that this presentation is not going to be about the nitty gritty of unit testing or about benchmarking or how do you step through certain methods and how do you make sure you keep your code as clean as you can, or how do you leverage graphs in a solution, in Dynamo Player, or how do you run a Grasshopper um, script. I think those things really are very specific or can be very specific to a firm or to an organization, how they run them against their projects and how they can be embedded. But to me, I think all this stuff starts at a higher level, and it really starts with your people and making sure that you get your people involved and ask questions. Ask them to be involved, and that's really going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to problems. Um, we talked about instructions for just a second. Here's just a really quick case study example of, hey, we've got this tool. It allows you to create curtain walls. It throws elevations on them. It throws tags on them. It does all this kind of stuff, which is very powerful, but it's also doing a lot of things. It's potentially affecting a lot of different views, let's say in a Revit model for this example. And it all is based around making sure you have the right things and in the right setup to make that happen. So just a simple way for instructions is to make sure that everything is kind of spelled out. That's the first step in quality control is tell the user what you want them to do and in a way that makes sense to them. Say, okay, pick a view type, pick a dimension style, pick a tag. How far offset do you want to have the information showing up in that view? And then if you need to leverage parameters, tell them what kind of parameter they need to make. Hey, you really need to have this parameter in your project to make this work. It needs to be this type, it needs to be named this, and it needs to be of this category. And I think that those simple things, as opposed to one or two or three people or a group of people trying to go around and check to make sure every project has this parameter, and what if you're working on a project that's not, based on the RDG template in my case. And just to help them out and again let them know, hey, it's just not working. If it just doesn't work over and over again, then people walk away from it. And when we're trying to really get adoption, then making people frustrated from the moment one because it doesn't give any information or you don't give people any instructions or what you do give them doesn't make any sense, um, then you're getting people turned off to that approach from the get-go. So some other things that I've noticed over time is that status bars are huge for long running operations. In some cases, in this tool, for example, creating curtain walls, there's been cases where I've made 400 or 500 curtain wall elevations in a project at one time. That can take quite a bit of time to go through and create all those, clip them all, provide the dimensions and the tagging and so forth. And so having a status bar that kind of walks along with you and lets you know, hey, I'm still running. I know it says not responding, but don't close me. You're not losing any work. We're still moving. Those things just put users at ease, and that's another way from like I said, a quality control perspective that you can keep people happy. And when people are happy, things work better, and you get more appropriate feedback. And error handling is the same thing. That if there is something that happens along the way, If it's something that just you can't, obviously move past, right? You catch whatever those failing elements are, and then you present that information to the user. Hey, can't do this because this completely failed, and we need you to do X, Y, or Z. Or if it's something we can move past, log it, and then at the end say, we did 98% of these, but this 2% didn't work for this reason, or the view that you were in was locked, or whatever the case is. Just give them that information, and try to make it not every single thing has to be just a complete fail. If it can move through the majority of pieces, then folks are going to be a lot more apt to go and manually create 2% of something than be frustrated that it just didn't work and wouldn't do anything for them. The the really important part I've mentioned here, and I want to reiterate, is really people. And RDG has 176 employees. Obviously, not all of them are design or architecture staff or engineering staff specifically, but we have a lot of people to help facilitate. And currently, I am the only person in the computational design role, the only person programming or really creating, graphs or scripts or add-ins or whatever terminology you want to throw on top of it. And so, in order to make sure that I can make the most of my time and benefit everyone the best that I can, I rely heavily on folks to be my test victims. We have a beta test group that spans multiple disciplines. It spans multiple geographic locations from an office perspective. Um, you know, it market sectors. Every way you can look at it, we've diversified that so that when we do updates on a weekly or a biweekly standpoint, we send that out. We say, hey, here's the new updates. Here's what to expect. Here's where you can install it, and they run a little bit of risk knowing that if they try to use some of those tools in a production environment, there's a possibility that it may crash their model. There's a possibility that it may not give them the results that they want, but they understand how important it is to really try their best to use it and provide accurate and immediate feedback when requested, so that we can fine tune those things or fix problems when they arise, uh, to really benefit the whole. And from a culture standpoint, again, trying to really get that buy-in, get that adoption. And so not only do you have people using these in a real world experience, not in a perfect test environment on a singular template, but on projects working with different disciplines or different firms across the country, and leveraging those in a capacity that will actually give you tangible results, is going to really impact your quality assurance, um, in a way that you couldn't do just sitting at your desk, one person saying, oh, well, it worked on my model. It was perfectly set up for it, so surely it'll work for everybody else. So folks are really the most important part of this, again, to try to get them through. And even the instructions or the information given to them when we provide them with those updates, you know, we try to make sure that we are providing icons when we're doing that. It's another quality assurance method, right? We used to have it to where every single button looked the same because we didn't want to spend the time to make icons. But people were like, I don't know what this one does, or I don't know, they all look the same, so how am I supposed to know what's going on? Even though the name was there, right? We're very visual, we're very graphic folks in the AEC, and so trying to give them something that makes sense to them to just graphically look at real quick and say, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that one's doing, and I'm going to go push it. And then you hover over it and you want to get tool tips, right? It wants to tell people this is what I'm going to be doing for you. And even if there's a, hey, make sure you have this in place, or you need to make sure to do these steps first, just trying to really spell out what those instructions look like for those test users, right? Those victims. And not only does that help them give you feedback, it helps prevent them from bombing their projects, but it also puts them in a position now to be stewards, of the computational tools. So when people come and ask questions, they don't have to come back to just you or your small team and say, oh, well, Sean's the only person that's going to know how that works, so every single question has to go through him. No, there's 13 to 15 other people. 15% of our staff knows really well how this works because they've been using it for a month or 2 months ahead of everybody else. So it really gets them ingrained in the information, and even letting them know, hey, again, just some putting the information out in front of them. Hey, you're trying to link a view from another model to use, but the link you're trying to link it from is not up to date. Are you sure you don't want to reload before you do that? Okay, let somebody reload. Hey, this view is already here, or we can't find this view anymore. Are you sure you want to use it, or do you want to get rid of it? Just constantly giving updates, constantly giving information. And the more you can give them, then again, the more in the know they are, and the better they can help themselves or give feedback on, hey, this thing kept telling me that my link wasn't loaded, but I just reloaded it. Why is it telling me that? Well, maybe you have work sets that are turned off, and that's what it's trying to access. Just just let people know, and really, at the end of the day, from a quality assurance standpoint, you'll make your lives a lot easier instead of trying to pick every single thing for the user, right? Nope, you're going to use this geometry, you're going to use this lines, you're going to use, this list of information. Let the user decide. It takes more work to provide lists for all of these things from a software development side. But if you let the user choose and you let them pick what makes sense for them on their projects, or you're populating those lists based on what's already available and whatever software they're using, then they don't have to say, well, I'm working with firm X, not RDG's template, and these things aren't available, so now I can't use any of this, right? You really want to let them decide how they're going to use it to ensure the quality, not necessarily of output all the time, but quality of use ability and ease of use is a really big component to me and how I think we try to go about things. Um, and that's that is really how to make sure you get people to buy in. I think just giving them the power, letting them feel like they really understand and can drive those decisions, and that you're not inhibiting their design ability. And I think that's going to lead us into this next section here a little bit, where you know data flexibility versus data integrity, right? The whole kind of adage of junk in, junk out. Um, how do we let people be involved? How do we get them involved? How do we ask ourselves what do we need to be doing? What do people want? How do we actually quality assure ourselves in a method that allows us to provide tools or time-saving opportunities for our folks? And again, from a standpoint of people, we try to leverage surveys. I know people are like, oh, survey, I got to answer more questions. We look at making these things like super brief and very much to the point, and we don't do it super often, but we do it often enough to make sure that we're moving forward on things and that we're not leaving pieces out to dry. And so we'll ask, company-wide surveys that are hosted on an internal network. We'll ask the same things of some of our BIM coordinator teams, but we're trying to leverage people's actual project experience, what their immediate needs may be, fixes to software, just where are the problems in their day-to-day lives. And I think by giving people a form where they may or may not have to put their name in, right? They can be anonymous, they can gripe, they can harp, or they can even say, hey, man, this works really good. Really appreciate it, but wouldn't it be nice if it could also do this? And so, again, it's not, in my opinion, it's not always about making sure that, the color transparency is right for the final graphic. That's very important. But if nothing works up to that point, or if you've created something that makes super awesome graphics, but nobody needs to use it, then you're limiting yourself and you're not providing an ROI, which at the end of the day is what obviously leadership cares about. And so once we ask questions like that, we always want to make sure that we're going back and we're using data that we already have available. And so, for instance, at RDG, one of the things I put together is actually like a data harvesting tool where we have a virtual machine. It's got an instance of Revit running on it, and we fill in project locations into. a SQL database, and the software is constantly checking for any updates to that. And once we throw a path in there with some other pieces of information, which we've provided a link to do that on our internal website. So anyone who wants to go and basically have a project archived or harvested can just throw that in there real quick, and the machine just sits there kind of waiting for input. So once it grabs that and it harvests the information, we've got more than 100 projects we fed into this thing, over 10 million square feet, 18,000 plus rooms that we've pulled out. And one of the things we're looking at is we're looking across market sectors. You can see here, um, we use focus markets. So focus markets are our market sectors. We're leveraging projects from all those different ones to look at room naming and department naming. And the reason we want to do that is we want to try to have some consistency, and we want to make sure that we're actually streamlining our data inputs so that as we are building tools and as we are using features to kind of assure that we have the right outputs and use that data, we we can't do that unless we look at past projects to really ensure how everybody's moving forward. So we harvest a bunch of data out of stuff, and we constantly are tracking things from different projects, which helps us then when we go back into our projects, let's say, we have the ability to then to connect the information from that database, not only for a project specifically, but across multiple projects. So we tie that information in, and then we can actually leverage, the past 3 or 4 projects and say, okay, well, how large was a team meeting room for 10 people across these last 3 projects that are applicable to what we're doing in the same market sector. And we can actually feed that information back into our project. So we're actually trying to, quality control the data of our designers and of our programmers and of the markets, competition. We feed information in there from not only our projects, but other projects that we find, or from other competitive firms that we compete against for projects that if we leverage their information, then we have a way to say, okay, you're doing better than this. We're in line with them. Where are we seeing differences to make sure that we're really checking on where that data lines up across our projects? And the nice thing from that standpoint is that once we have that information in, we're obviously leveraging it back into our projects, like I mentioned, but then we can do visuals on top of it. So another way to assure the data is accurate or be able to use that information and leverage and get it in owners' hands or a prospective client, an interview, or even our internal teams when we're looking at go no go situations. We can say, okay, for this area of the country, we would normally see this project in the senior living building department. We think these are past projects that we've done. This is how large they are. This is where the costs have come in. And so we think this project's going to cost this, or it has usually this many rooms based on the population that we want to provide um, living quarters for. So it helps kind of across the board. And I think looking at ways to tie your data or your tools across different aspects is another way to ensure um, you know, you can really get the best out of it, right? You can really gain the most ROI that you can, but then it's just more eyes and more people looking at it from different angles. And as you have more people looking at it from those different angles, you're going to find more pieces of that information that needs to be, maybe tweaked, or maybe it's not showing quite the way you'd like it. Or somebody says, hey, well, I really want to see this data slice that way. You know what? All right, we can make that happen most likely with the information we've already collected. But if we can't, how can we go find more information or pull um, different bits of information from what we already have available, and why is that important? Um, and I think something else to consider there is that it's not only about always providing more and more and more information, it's always um, the most important piece is looking for accurate information. And what we don't want to do with this is be able to let people kind of start to slice away on it and really present some false narratives based on data manipulation. And so creating templates, like what we've got up on the screen here, where you can connect it to a different market sector, but the portions of information that's being pulled isn't really editable by the base user. So they need to come ask and say, hey, how can I get maybe this thing to show up on the screen like this? It's like, well, I think that's probably not the right way to go about doing it because it's going to present information that may not actually scale up for this type of project. In this part of the country, that's really not something that we're going to be doing, from our history. And so let's not look at it that way. How about we do it this way? So I think that's just important from a data quality assurance standpoint to really make sure um, we give it to the users, we let them have it, but let's not just give them keys to the kingdom because they can actually present the data inaccurately and therefore make it look like we have wrong information when really it's about how it's being presented. Um, and again, just to go back to that, to keep people involved and give them opportunities to ask for that kind of stuff. Not only obviously will be approachable within our office, our culture is very, very open, very much just stop by, chat about something, connections on an everyday basis. But again, our internal communication tools or internal websites to make sure that people have an idea of what's going on, right? We have a roadmap. We take those surveys that we've talked about earlier, and we take that information in, we distill it down, we pair up things that are similar or software platforms that are similar or from disciplines, market sectors. We combine those different things together, and then we provide kind of a working roadmap on things that we've completed, what are we currently working on, what are things that maybe we haven't started but should be on the list, or even potentially things that are like, yeah, we think that might affect one person one time on this one project, so it's not something we're looking at doing firm wide unless we can get some additional information. And then we also even go to the point of trying to say, okay, maybe you think it's a software solution, or maybe you think it is a design solution, but perhaps it's more of just a process, um, change in process on how you might be doing something, right? Maybe you've always just done this thing this way every project and you're getting tired of it. But if we tweak how we're doing maybe data up front or we're doing entry up front, then it's no longer going to be this just thorn in your side. We can actually change the process and not have to put um, a software solution to a people problem. And then so once we have that roadmap, we go through, we create things, and then we make sure we actually then give people instruction on them as well. So don't let people hang out there without really knowing kind of how things work. And don't just give them a 60-page document that explains step by step, button by button to push, but doesn't actually give them kind of some of the why or how or show them in a real project environment. So, we do short little videos that are maybe 2 to 10 minutes long, depending on what we are trying to present and how we're trying to show it. And we use a real project and a real life scenario of how it would be used. And we step through every single piece. We show, okay, this is what's going to break it, and this is why it breaks it. So if you do it this way and that way, that's how we can make sure that we get you accurate information and we'll get the project accurate information and with the least amount of resistance along the way. So it's not something that's super complex, but we have just found that the short videos explaining a singular item, a singular topic, goes over far better than trying to present somebody with a document or a whole bunch of documents or, a user guide that you have to go try to find things in, and then it just kind of gives you a picture, maybe a couple sentences. Um, really explain to folks and give them the option to step through. And also, it's really important for onboarding. One of the biggest things that we see, biggest problems that we see is that, we may develop things that work really good for folks, but as we bring new people in and we're having new folks join the team, how do we quickly get them up to speed on what we have available, um, and how can they leverage it right out the gate? And we can do that by providing these resources to them so they don't have to rely on somebody else. So I don't know how to use that tool, so you're going to have to do that part of the job. Or, well, I can't run that graph because I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, go watch this 4-minute video and you're going to be a pro just like I am. And then the last piece I want to talk about in my session here is that we want to make sure we're asking questions, we're providing information up front, we're providing instructions, right? We want to be able to leverage the data. We want to make sure that it's consistent, that it's credible. There's a saying that I like to use. It's kind of corny, but it's consistency creates credibility, right? If you do the same thing the same way each time, then people begin to rely on how that works. If my error messages always look the same, then they'd be like, okay, that's from an RDG um, tool, and that means that if something's not working, then I need to go talk to Sean about it. And so once we do those things, we also want to make sure we're keeping, not, I shouldn't say tabs on people, um, but we want to understand what is and what isn't working. How often are they being used? People ask for this stuff. Is it really facilitating their projects better? Uh, and so, one of the things that we looked at is just purely model synchronizations, right? We're actually tracking how long it takes for every model to synchronize. And not only do we track how long they take, we track how big they are. We track whether it's a BIM 360 or a cloud project versus a local project. We track how we look at averages. What's the average model taking to synchronize? How long are we using to do those things? And you can see here, dating back to January 1 of 2020, if you're looking kind of quote unquote pre-pandemic or beginning of the pandemic, you can see a lot of our projects are local, which is the light blue bars in this case. And as time moved through and pretty quickly, we transitioned to where almost all of our projects, um, or the majority of our projects anyways, were all cloud-based because that's how we were working in a distributed fashion. And now as we've kind of loosened back up and getting here deep into 2021, we have not gone back down to pre-pandemic levels, and we actually are stepping back up again. So it gives us the ability to not only look from a quality assurance perspective, but we can also start to see trends and things that then we can take back to leadership and say, hey, we do need an extra 15 BIM 360 licenses because we can show how the data is moving and the projects are going. But some of the numbers are kind of eye-opening too, that, there's a total of 41 weeks that people have set watching their wheel spin to synchronize a Revit model over the last year and 9 months. You know, you can also look to see how big they are when they're opened, how many people are opening models, and how frequently they are, on a month-to-month basis. So just really stripping through the data and looking at what's available. And then from an ROI perspective, we track the tool usage. We track what people are automating, what they're doing to facilitate improvements on their project. And we can do that by office. We can do that by geographic location. We can even strip it down into market sector by connecting back to our staffing database. And we can see hours saved. So 4,500 plus hours, and we always use numbers that are low to do this so that we're not trying to like fictitiously, inflate these numbers. But this is a real tangible number in terms of the amount of time that's been saved in the last year and a half plus. And at that rate, I mean, that's two full-time employees that we have saved over that duration in terms of time. So, there's a real investment there, and you can see that a lot of the numbers kind of really crunched down here, kind of in the early beginnings in the middle of the pandemic. And that was really because our metrics and our software was based on an internal network scenario. So as we've started to move back here into the late 2021, we've actually adjusted that and moved it to a cloud infrastructure. So we make sure we're keeping that information flowing regardless of where folks are working at. Um, and another thing you can see here is that we track how often those are used, obviously. And so you can see kind of the spike, right? These upfront grouping, those are the ones that are used most often from a manual perspective. And so all these ones down here on the end are all tools that have been used, one or two or 15 times. That probably tells us, hey, either it doesn't work, we haven't trained people well enough to use it, or it's not something people really care to use. And so we can circle back around on that and make sure that from a time investment standpoint, we're investing our time in the things that make the most sense, but we're also wanting to check to make sure things are actually working the way that they're supposed to. So those are the slides that I have for today. I apologize actually that I was not able to attend in person. Things didn't quite line up there. But if anybody has any questions, I am on the line to take those now. Thank you.